President Trump and the First Lady are back at the White House after an undisclosed visit to U.S. troops in Iraq yesterday. The president left Washington late Christmas night and spent about 3 hours at al-Assad Air Base. It was President Trump's first visit to a combat zone in nearly 2 years as president. David Martin has more from the Pentagon.
Dressed for the part, the president took credit for what he called the near elimination of ISIS, even though fighting is still going on in Syria.
When I became president, they were a very dominant group. They were very dominant. Today, they're not so dominant anymore.
CBS News chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett was there.
The president said it's his obligation as commander-in-chief to set clear objectives for the U.S. military, and when those objectives are achieved, the troops should be allowed to come home.
America shouldn't be doing the fighting for every nation on earth. If they want us to do the fighting, they also have to pay a price. And sometimes that's also a monetary price. So we're not the suckers of the world. We're no longer the suckers, folks.
He insisted the decision to pull out of Syria was not as sudden as it seemed, that he had told the military to get out 1.5 years ago, but kept giving in to their requests to stay another 6 months.
And they said again recently, could we have more time? I said, nope, you can't have any more time. We got enough time.
And he answered the one question most Iraqis and all the troops have: will the U.S. pull out of Iraq as well?
No plans at all, no. In fact, we could use this as a base if we wanted to do something in Syria.
15 years after American tanks rolled into Baghdad, Air Force One had to take extraordinary security precautions to fly into the country.
If you would have seen what we had to go through with the darkened plane, with all windows closed, with no lights on whatsoever, anywhere, pitch black. Did I have a concern? Yeah, I had a concern.
Senior staff writer for The Hill, Scott Wong, is in Washington. He joins us now. So, Scott, President left for Iraq without meeting any Iraqi officials. The members of the Iraqi parliament want American troops expelled. Where exactly would that leave the U.S. military after the drawdown of forces we're looking at in Syria and in Afghanistan?
Well, perhaps Iraqi officials are looking at some of the president's recent announcements in Syria and Afghanistan and saying, well, we have an opportunity here. The president's in a mood. He's trying to withdraw troops and draw down forces in other parts of the world. Maybe we can make some progress with the president right now and see if he's open to pulling troops out of Iraq. Clearly, the president said that was not the case, but he could change his mind at a moment's notice. And, right now there are a lot of concerns about, whether we are, in fact, moving towards American isolationism with these announcements in Syria and Afghanistan. Obviously, a lot of Republicans and Democrats alike just very concerned about what this will mean for stability throughout the world. And so these have been very tumultuous times in the White House, especially when it comes to foreign policy.
You know, when you look at this surprise visit, it's very common for presidents. We know George W. Bush went on a Thanksgiving surprise trip to Afghanistan. President Obama, to Iraq. President Obama went to Afghanistan at one point. We know President Trump has been criticized for not going into a combat zone. Do we know what the calculus was of sending him at this time? And do you think that criticism played into this?
I'm sure the president, because he watches a lot of TV and a lot of talking heads on TV, he did hear the criticism. As I understand it, this was a trip that was days, if not weeks, in the making. And so this was not a sort of last-minute reactionary trip because of the incredible amount of resources that are needed to transport the president and first lady overseas into a battle zone like this. But, clearly the president is very sensitive to criticism, and I'm sure, that was some part of the calculation. And as you mentioned, it seems like the president, he has been in the White House sort of watching all of these things unfold on TV during the holidays. And, this was probably a good chance for him to sort of reset amid all this turmoil that we're seeing in the stock markets and with the government shutdown.
Speaking of that government shutdown, Scott, you know, all these workers, federal government workers, are now second day back without a paycheck. Where is all this headed? Do you see some sort of light at the end of the tunnel here?
Right now, it does not seem like there is any light at the end of the tunnel. You know, from my sources on Capitol Hill, it sounds like things are very quiet. The leadership it has not yet returned to Washington in the Republican and Democratic Party. While the House and Senate will be coming back into session for you know, more of a formality today after the Christmas break, there appears to be little movement and little communication happening between the Democratic leaders and the President of the United States. So that is extremely disconcerting. I think people are suggesting that what that all indicates is we are in for a very long shutdown. Many people are pointing to January 3rd as the next possible day where we could see movement. That's the day, of course, that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats take back control of the House of Representatives. And Nancy Pelosi is vowing to, as one of the first votes of the new year and the new Congress, to reopen the government with a clean funding bill not tied to the president's border wall. That will again create a standoff situation with the president, who is insisting on the $5 billion for his border wall.
Yeah, it certainly would create a standoff. While I have you here, Scott, I want to ask you, how is the Trump administration responding to news of a second child death in Border Patrol custody?
Well, I think they're taking it very seriously. Clearly, they are calling it a tragedy. Anytime you have a child that dies in custody, clearly that is a tragedy. However, they are not accepting any blame for the child's death. The child, you know, clearly had been very sick. They did provide some antibiotics, as I understand it, to the child, but unfortunately, this 8-year-old did not make it. What they are doing in terms of DHS and Customs and Border Patrol policy, in terms of changes we might see, they're reaching out to other agencies in the federal government, the Pentagon, HHS, to see if they could help support and provide additional medical assistance to Customs and Border Protection, who doesn't have a ton of medical staff on hand. Secondly, I think they are doing additional medical checks of any children, especially those who are under the age of 10. Anyone who comes into U.S. custody, they want to be sure that they are getting properly cared for and properly examined in light of these now 2 deaths of children under the age of 10.
Scott, do we know when Kirstjen Nielsen, the Homeland Security Secretary, was testifying before Capitol Hill, she didn't know how many people in total, adults and children, had died in the custody of the Department of Homeland Security. Do we have any numbers on that?
I haven't seen any hard numbers in terms of deaths, but one thing that we did hear yesterday from Steny Hoyer, the incoming Democratic majority leader, he said that Democrats, when they take charge of Congress on January 3rd, they will immediately hold hearings and investigations into these children's deaths. That's something we have not seen from Republicans who have been in control for these last several years. And so that will be one change that we will be looking for in the new year when the new Congress starts after January 3rd.
A lot of activity expected at the start of the new year. Scott, I think you'll be pretty busy. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much.